Surjeet Kaur arrived at her cousin's wedding expecting laughter, music, and family, but by the end of the night she would vanish without a trace, the victim of a cold-blooded plot hatched by the very people she trusted most. The winter sun had just begun to sink behind the horizon, casting an amber glow over the sprawling farmhouse where the wedding was taking place. Strings of golden lights crisscrossed the courtyard, swaying gently in the cold evening breeze. Guests moved in and out of the decorated tents, balancing plates piled high with rich curries, fragrant rice, and sweet jalebis dripping with syrup. The air buzzed with the hum of conversation, the beat of dhol drums, and bursts of laughter. It was the kind of atmosphere where everyone's guard was lowered, where joy was expected to be the only emotion in the room. Yet, in the shadows between the tents, eyes followed Surjeet Kaur with unsettling precision. She looked every bit the picture of celebration, dressed in a deep maroon sal, wore suit embroidered with gold, her long braid woven with jasmine flowers. Her smile was warm, polite, and effortless, but her presence carried a quiet dignity that set her apart from many of her relatives. Surjeet was not just another guest. She was family, and more importantly, she was a symbol of something several people in that gathering wanted, but could not have control over a legacy she had inherited. To those people, her life was less valuable than the property and assets her name commanded. While she stood in the open courtyard, greeting an aunt she hadn't seen in years, a small group of relatives exchanged glances from across the room. Their expressions never betrayed their true intentions. They blended seamlessly with the joy of the occasion, clapping for the bride and groom, laughing at jokes, even joining the dance floor. But every step they took, and every glance they gave one another, was a part of an unspoken signal. The wedding was the moment they had been waiting for. It was perfect in their eyes. No one would suspect a thing. Hundreds of people were here, moving in and out of spaces, creating a chaos that could hide anything. Music would drown out noise. The distractions were endless. And most importantly, everyone's attention was fixed on the couple at the center of the stage, not on a woman quietly moving around the fringes of the celebration. Surjeet remained unaware of the undercurrent running through the night. She was focused on helping with small tasks, making sure guests were comfortable, assisting the bride's mother with last-minute arrangements, and stopping by tables to share a laugh or two. It wasn't unusual for her to be busy during family events. She had always been dependable, but that same helpful nature made her an easy target. If someone told her something needed to be done urgently, she would go without hesitation, without asking questions. In another corner of the venue, away from the laughter and lights, the conspirators quietly checked the timing. They knew the moment would have to be precise. Too early, and they risked someone noticing. Too late, and the opportunity would slip away. The drums pounded louder, dancers twirled under flashing lights, and somewhere in the crowd, someone began moving towards Surjeet with a fabricated request that would lead her exactly where they wanted. The night was still young, but the trap had already been set. The seeds of resentment had been sown long before the wedding night, quietly sprouting in the corners of family conversations and whispered phone calls. Surjeet Kaur had never asked for more than her fair share, but life had placed her in a position that many in her family could not accept. After her father's passing, his will had been read in a small lawyer's office, a moment meant to provide closure. Instead, it ignited a fire that would burn for months. The documents were clear. Surjeet was to inherit a larger portion of the family's land and assets, a decision her father had made in recognition of her years of loyalty and care toward her parents. It was not a decision everyone welcomed. Her uncles and cousins felt cheated, believing that their contributions to the family had been overlooked. Some tried to contest the will, but legal channels offered no relief. Every time they met her, their smiles hid the sharp edges of their frustration. They began to speak of her not as a relative, but as an obstacle, someone standing between them and what they saw as rightfully theirs. That bitterness turned into a dangerous kind of creativity. If they could not take the inheritance through courts or persuasion, they would take it by removing her entirely. The plan began as nothing more than a passing remark over tea, half joking and half serious. But like a seed planted in fertile ground, the idea grew. fed by shared grievances and private agreements. Each conversation stripped away the moral hesitation that might have stopped them. Soon they were discussing specifics, how to ensure there would be no suspicion, when and where to act, and how to make it appear as though fate had simply been cruel to her. The wedding presented itself as the perfect stage. It would draw together the entire extended family, create noise and distraction, and offer a natural explanation for her sudden absence. If she vanished that night, the chaos would work in their favor. People would assume she had left for some urgent matter, or that she had been caught up in the whirlwind of tasks and guests. Even if someone realized she was missing, too much time would pass before any serious search began. What made the plot especially chilling was how close-knit this family appeared to outsiders. They dined together, celebrated together, and stood shoulder to shoulder in public, but behind that picture of unity, quiet meetings took place in shuttered rooms. Phone calls were made late at night, their tones hushed and deliberate. Every detail was rehearsed until no part of the scheme seemed risky in their minds. Surjeet, unaware of these dark undercurrents, carried herself with her usual calm confidence, never suspecting that her very presence in her own family had become a threat to them. The resentment had grown too deep, and the conspirators had convinced themselves that the inheritance she held was worth more than her life. By the time the wedding day arrived, their minds were made up. There would be no turning back. The wedding night unfolded like a carefully orchestrated performance, each part of the evening flowing into the next. Guests were still arriving when the first phase of the plan was quietly set into motion. Among the clinking of glasses and the bursts of camera flashes, a select group of relatives kept their attention fixed not on the bride and groom, but on Surjeet. They knew her movements, her habits, and her willingness to help without question. She was the kind of person who could be drawn away from a crowd with a simple request. That trait, once admired, would now be exploited. The conspirators had already identified the location where everything would happen. A dimly lit storage area tucked at the far edge of the venue, past the rows of parked cars and away from the festive noise. It was where extra supplies were kept, spare chairs, stacks of plates, crates of bottled water. It was out of sight from most guests, and the few who passed by wouldn't linger. The ground there was uneven, littered with fallen leaves and bits of gravel, and the single flickering bulb above the doorway made it look uninviting. For the people plotting the crime, it was perfect. The pretext for luring her was simple. Earlier in the evening, one of the conspirators had quietly slipped a wrapped gift box into the storage room. It wasn't valuable, just a prop, something to create the story they needed. They would tell her that an important gift for the bride had been misplaced and needed to be retrieved quickly. Surjeet, with her instinct to be helpful, would not refuse. They had even planned who would make the request, choosing a relative she trusted enough not to question. As the music swelled in the main courtyard, the group remained patient. They blended into the crowd, appearing to dance, to chat, to laugh at jokes. Every few minutes, eyes would meet across the room, a silent check to ensure everyone was ready. Timing was critical. If they acted too early, people might notice her absence, but if they waited too long, the night could slip away without an opportunity. Finally, the signal was given, a subtle nod from one cousin to another. The chosen relative approached Surjeet, their expression casual, their tone urgent but not alarming. From across the courtyard, the others watched as she listened and nodded, setting down her glass of water before walking toward the darker side of the venue. The moment she turned away from the lights, the crowd seemed to swallow her absence. In the shadows, two more members of the group began to move, following her path, but keeping enough distance to avoid drawing attention. The sound of drums and laughter faded as she neared the storage room. The faint hum of the generator was the only noise out here, masking the soft crunch of footsteps behind her. What she believed was a simple errand was, in truth, the point of no return. The trap they had built over months of planning was about to close. Surjeet's steps slowed as she reached the narrow path leading to the storage area. The glow of the wedding lights behind her had faded, replaced by the dim flicker of a lone bulb swaying gently above the doorway. She paused for a moment, glancing around, but saw nothing unusual. Just stacks of chairs leaning against the wall and a few shadows cast by the nearby trees. Somewhere in the distance, the beat of drums continued, faint but steady, like a pulse reminding her of the celebration still in full swing. She pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest, and stepped inside. The room smelled of dust and metal. Cardboard boxes were piled high against one wall, and long tables stacked with extra utensils stretched along another. In the far corner, she noticed the small wrapped box she had been told about, its shiny paper catching the weak light. She took a few steps toward it, unaware that the sound of the door closing behind her wasn't from the wind. In an instant, the air shifted. Two figures emerged from the shadows, moving with purpose. A third slipped in behind them, blocking her only exit. The realization came too late. This wasn't an errand, it was an ambush. Hands gripped her arms, firm and unyielding, dragging her toward the back of the room. The struggle was brief, not because she didn't fight, but because they had planned for this. They knew exactly how to overpower her, each movement rehearsed until it was second nature. Within minutes, the deed was done. Her body, now lifeless, was wrapped in a thick cloth, kept ready for this very moment. The conspirators worked quickly, every motion silent and practiced. They lifted her onto a wooden trolley used for moving heavy crates, and rolled her toward a side exit that opened onto the unlit stretch of land behind the venue. From there, a waiting vehicle stood ready, its engine cold to avoid attracting attention. The vehicle, a nondescript van borrowed from a friend of one of the conspirators, had been parked far enough from the main event to be invisible to guests but close enough for a swift escape. They loaded her inside, covering the bundle with sacks of grain to disguise it. One of them climbed into the driver's seat while the others returned to the celebration, their clothes neat, their faces calm. Back in the main courtyard, no one suspected anything. The bride and groom were on the stage, surrounded by guests eager to give blessings and pose for photographs. The smell of food filled the air and fireworks cracked in the sky above. Surjeet's absence went unnoticed in the swirl of movement and noise. Even her closest relatives assumed she was occupied elsewhere, perhaps helping with a last-minute task or speaking to a guest outside. In reality, the van was already pulling away from the venue, disappearing into the night. Its destination was a remote canal on the outskirts of town, where they intended to dispose of her and erase every trace. As the music played on, the people who loved her most remained unaware that she was already gone, and that the very ones offering them comfort would later prove to be the cause of their deepest grief. Days turned into weeks, and Surjeet's absence became a wound that would not close. At first, the family clung to explanations that felt easier to accept. Some whispered that she might have left suddenly for personal reasons, while others suggested she had gone to visit a friend or distant relative. Her mother refused to believe any of it, insisting something terrible had happened. The police were eventually called, but with no immediate evidence of foul play and no clear starting point. The search was slow and disorganized. The wedding guests had been too many, the movements of the night too chaotic, leaving investigators with little to work with. The conspirators maintained a united front, playing the part of grieving relatives with unnerving skill. They attended every meeting with police, provided rehearsed answers to questions, and even helped organize search efforts in nearby fields and rivers. To anyone watching, they were pillars of concern and solidarity. In reality, they felt confident that their plan had left no loose ends. The van had been cleaned thoroughly, the route taken that night carefully chosen to avoid cameras, and Surjeet's body had been weighted before being pushed into the canal. They believed she was gone forever, and with her, any threat to their claim on the inheritance. But fate, unpredictable and uninvited, had other ideas. A month after the wedding, the photographer hired for the event began reviewing the footage to create a wedding album. He sifted through hours of video, laughing faces, dancing feet, and flashing lights, until something caught his attention. In one sequence, the camera panned across the courtyard, capturing Surjeet walking toward the edge of the venue. Just seconds later, two of her cousins appeared in the same frame, moving in the same direction with an intensity that didn't match the joy of the evening. At first, the photographer thought little of it, but as he edited more footage, he noticed other moments. Quick glances exchanged, subtle nods, and the absence of those same relatives during a critical part of the night. Troubled by what he saw, he quietly handed the raw files to the police. Investigators, hungry for a break in the case, studied the videos frame by frame. The images were grainy in places, but the sequence was clear enough to raise suspicion. Once questioned separately, the cracks began to show. One conspirator contradicted another on where they had been at a certain time. Another hesitated when asked about the storage room. The more the police pressed, the more the false stories unraveled. Forensic teams searched the canal, eventually recovering enough evidence to confirm what had happened. The arrest of the cousins sent shockwaves through the town, shattering the illusion of a family bound by loyalty. The truth, when revealed, left neighbors and friends speechless. The wedding, a day meant to celebrate love and unity, had masked a calculated act of betrayal. Surjeet's story became a grim reminder that danger sometimes grows in the soil of familiarity, and that the hands offering comfort in public can be the same ones that strike in the dark. Her name lived on in the town's whispers, a warning that trust, once broken, can never truly be restored.